What's up, guys? I'm rebuilding the Trx250. It had an original piston in it from 1985. It's still running pretty good, but it was smoking a little bit, and it was definitely a little low in power. These are some of the bolts that came out of the head. Obviously, very Honda. Came out perfect. Didn't have a single bolt strip out or thread issue with anything on this motor, and that's because it's unmolested. It's never been apart. The only time I ever have issues with that is bikes that have been rebuilt a few times. So I got the top end off. Cam looks perfect, very little wear, and that is the same as the big red cam. So it has the big red cam, big red chain, sprocket, all in there. It's a 25-year, well, not 25, 1985, so 32-year-old timing chain. I'm not even going to change it because it's fine. That's how good the timing chains are on these bikes. Piston, however, as you can see, it'll focus, definitely been pretty tore up. And I hate to say this, but this thing would have still been running fine, but it has no air filter in it. This piston would have lasted another 20 years if someone would have maintained the air filter. But the bore was pretty washed out, as you can expect from a bike that's been running no air filter for who knows how long. Things that did fight me, however, this exhaust on this one's not like the 300. It's a two-piece exhaust, and you have to take it in half to get it off. And it was pretty seized. You can see how rusty that was. I had to tear up this end of the pipe a little bit with the flip blade screwdriver to pry it off. So when that goes back together, obviously a new OEM donut with some good exhaust paste around it so that will be watertight. Not that it's a huge deal, but I don't like that sound, the exhaust leaking. Another thing, that came out good, that came out good. Yeah, everything came out good. The only thing that really fought me was the exhaust. The exhaust was quite a lot of work. But I mean, you know, it's a really old exhaust. It's going to be rusty and tight. This frame is a little tighter than a 300 as far as getting everything out. You see how close the top of the head studs are to the frame. So the easiest thing to do is just pull the cylinder out between these two studs. They'll bend it a little bit. You yank the cylinder straight out this way. Definitely the right way to do it. My base gasket didn't tear, so I'm probably not even going to put a base gasket on it. I'm just going to reuse that 20-year-old one because why scrape it off when it didn't tear? And yeah, so going pretty well. As you can see, that's got a 19mm connecting rod. Connecting rod looks pretty good. You can see a little bit of wear on it, but if you can't feel it, it's usually fine. And this thing wasn't knocking or anything like that, so I'm not even going to worry about it. But yeah, going pretty good. This thing is going to get a OEM size piston. I looked into doing a 380 for it, or whatever a 380 would amounts to, in an engine of this stroke, right? Because it's the same exact jug and bore as a 300, it's just a different stroke. The problem is, see how tall this piston is because it's a short stroke. If you do any of the 300 big bore kits, you end up with a super low compression ratio because pistons aren't tall enough. The only way to do it would be like a custom piston and all this crap. And frankly, this bike's only two-wheel drive, doesn't need that much more power. And these big reds actually pull really hard from the factory with like the big exhaust they have. That's a pretty decent size exhaust. Good cam and everything, so factory board's going to be good. I'm going to go through the head, put some new valve seals because they're really old. Head doesn't even look that bad considering how much oil this thing was burning. Going to throw a new spark plug in it, you know, stuff like that, show it some love, but it's going to be up and running pretty good. And yeah, trying to think of anything else that people might find helpful. Oh, the bolts, like these big Allen bolts, sometimes those have a tendency to get real tight and want to stick. So whenever I take the bolts out on these, I smack the head of all these bolts with a punch and a hammer pretty good. It kind of stretches the bolt down in the hole and loosens up the threads. I did that on these 10mm too. Might not have been necessary, but I did that and I didn't have a single one pull the threads out. So it's definitely a good idea. And if you got one that's tight, you know, obviously tighten it first, then loosen it up. I did most of it with a 1/4 inch impact where it would fit. Some of it I did by hand, but yeah, it's amazing that these old motors are still worth maintaining and so easy to maintain. I mean, this thing is ancient, and it'll be running for another 30 years after I put this piston in it. Pretty awesome.